Today we're going to build some background knowledge about the Wells Shipman Ward House, as well as take a tour of the rooms below stairs. The house was built in 1755 by a shipbuilder named Thomas Wells as a wedding present to his son John and new wife Jerusha. John followed his father's footsteps and continued his shipbuilding business. The business was located approximately a half a mile from the house on the Connecticut River. They would have been able to see the shipyard from the house since only 30% of the land was forested at the time. By comparison, approximately 53% of Connecticut is forested now. At that time, forests were cut down to make room for farms and produce wood for fires and, of course, for shipbuilding. In 1764, the business was doing very well. John decided to go to Philadelphia to expand the business. Unfortunately, he became sick there with what they thought was a simple cold. However, when he returned, he soon died. Jerusha was then left with 5 children, all under the age of 10. Unfortunately, since Jerusha was a woman, she could not inherit the house or property. However, she and the children were allowed to live in the house while the case was in probate for 11 years. When the case was finally settled, the eldest son would have been the one to inherit the property, but John had already moved out of the house. Therefore, the property went to the second son, named George. When the Revolutionary War began, the colonists were fighting the best naval force in the world with a very small navy. General Washington enlisted the aid of private ships called privateers. These ships were actually legalized pirates who could take over British merchant ships and keep some of the supplies on board after giving needed supplies to the Continental forces. George used 3 of his ships to join this venture. However, he did not make much money as a privateer, and after the war, with the onset of an embargo with England, he went bankrupt. As a result, in 1789, he was forced to sell the house and shipyard to Captain Stephen Shipman, also a shipbuilder. The house then remained in the Shipman family for 125 years. The last shipman to live in the house, Ellen, sold it to an antique dealer, who then sold it to Dr. and Mrs. Ward in 1929. The Wards donated the house and property to the Historical Society of Glastonbury in the 1960s. Therefore, the name Wells Shipman Ward House. In colonial times, this house was considered a mansion. This was because of its size. It has 10 rooms and 4 closets. Believe it or not, the closets were actually considered rooms when it came time to pay taxes, so it was taxed as a 14-room house. When looking at the outside of the house, one can notice that it is white on 3 sides and red in the back. This is because red was cheaper, so they decided to paint the part of the house that's not often seen the cheaper color. The first room we're going to look at below stairs, or downstairs, is the office. It was believed to be the office used by the various shipbuilders who lived in the home. While it was connected to other rooms downstairs, there was a separate entrance, which is kind of why they thought it was used as an office for the shipbuilders. It is in this room that we have corroboration that the house was built in 1755. When the Historical Society began renovations, they removed the paneling to refurbish it. Here on the original wood, you can see the date 1755. The second room below stairs that we're going to take a look at is the bedroom. This is the only room of the house called a bedroom. Located by the kitchen, this is where babies were born, where they slept during the day, and where sick people lay so they could be tended to by the mother who spent most of the day in the kitchen. Speaking of the kitchen, let's take a closer look at it. This was the most used room in the house. It contains the largest known colonial fireplace in Connecticut, 9.5 feet wide by 4.5 feet high by 3.5 feet deep. Cooking was done over an open fire with a big pot of water always present. Fire was banked at night to prevent a house fire, but it was not out completely since it was too difficult to start a new fire with a fire starter. The fire would need to be rekindled the next morning. If more cooking surfaces were needed, small piles of ash could be pulled forward to create burners. There were 2 beehive ovens, which were probably used on Saturday for the weekly baking. Small fires were started with small fire sticks, and the oven heated up to the right temperature of 450 degrees, which took about an hour and a half to reach. The temperature was checked by sticking one's arm in the oven and counting to 10. If that could be done, it was ready. The main meal of the day would be eaten around 1 or 2 p.m., because if they waited until evening, it would be too difficult to see since it would be dark in the winter. Also, most of the men worked on or near the home so they could get to a midday meal easily. The next room we're going to look at is called the buttery. This small room was the storage room. It was called a buttery after the butts or barrels where food was stored. It also contained trenchers or plates and other eating utensils. More food was stored beneath the buttery in the cellar, which held food that needed colder storage. The last room we're going to look at below stairs was called the best room. This room was the dining room and where the Wells would have their main meal around 2 p.m. The Wells' best pieces of furniture would be here too, and even a bed for visitors. The closet in this room was called a buffet, where fine china and tasty desserts could be displayed for their guests.